Hello, friends. So, Bible study. The Niv, Acts, chapter 21, and we're going to go 18 to 36. So, it's the rest of chapter 21. We did the first half of it yesterday. Now, I'm going to say this, it largely involves Paul, right? Because Paul's who we've been following around. But I'm going to be a little bit honest here about me and the Apostle Paul. Me and Paul, I'm going to say, have a middling history. If Jesus hadn't come and talked to him after he was dead in a spirit form, I would argue that Paul can't even be considered an apostle, and he's in fact only a disciple, because it was after Jesus' death that he became a follower. And that's kind of like the definition. If you start following Jesus because an apostle spoke to you, you're a disciple, not an apostle. The apostles are the people who were hanging out with Jesus while he was alive, in my brain. Except it was the ghost of Jesus who showed up and talked to the apostle Paul. So, therefore, he becomes an apostle because Jesus spoke to him directly. Now, Paul is stubborn, but he's certainly also a firebrand and dynamic. But he's got a shady past. Right? He comes into play in Stephen, right? In the story of Stephen as we've been going through this. Because he wants people to die for having their faith in Christianity until he becomes a Christian. Right? Until Jesus talks to him directly. So, the thing with being a follower, I know that he gets people out of jail a lot. Like, you got to chain him with multiple chains because he just lets people free. You can't stop him if you want to. The Romans are realizing this. These apostles, these are slippery. We got to make sure we get enough chains on them. Because if one chain didn't hold them, maybe five will. I mean, like, because they're thinking they're probably, like, picking the lock. They don't realize the futility of, God is just dropping the chains off. You can't stop God, right? They don't know these things. But it doesn't mean that you don't pay for your mistakes. It means you don't argue about your punishment. Because as a follower, you realize you're going to make mistakes, and you realize the only way to stay on the narrow footpath is to accept your punishments and move forward, move through them, puzzle through them, figure them out. Because you're supposed to be the example for the rest of the world. So then you can't try to get out of things. There's no loopholes into heaven. There's acting right and getting there. And that's really basically all there is. So Paul is responsible for a lot of Christian deaths. If you remember, he had to get sent off to a bunch of places because nobody would trust him because he has blood on his hands. So he had been warned up coming to this by the Holy Spirit that if he goes to Jerusalem, he's going to get arrested. And he's going to be in prison. And he knows that he's seen it. And he's determined to do it anyway. Why? Because he's responsible for the deaths of others. And no amount of good works he's doing out there makes him escape the punishment that goes along with the crime he did. Because he was still free. The next day, verse 18, the next day, Paul and the rest of us went to see James, and all the elders were present. Paul greeted them and reported in detail what God had done among the Gentiles through his ministry. When they heard this, they praised God. Then they said to Paul, "You see, brother, how many thousands of Jews have believed, and all of them are zealous for the law. They have been informed that you teach all the Jews who live amongst the Gentiles to turn away from Moses, telling them not to circumcise their children or live according to our customs. What shall we do? They will certainly hear that you've come here," as he's been warned repeatedly by the Holy Spirit before this moment. But he's trying to be honorable. So, do what we tell you. There are 4 men with us who have made a vow. Take these men, join in their purification rites, and pay their expenses. so that they can have their head shaved. Then everyone will know there is no truth in these reports about you, that you yourself are living in obedience to the law. As for the Gentile believers, we have written them about our decision that they should abstain from food sacrificed to idols, from blood, and from meat of strangled animals, and from sexual immorality. The next day, Paul took the men and purified himself along with them. Then they went to the temple to give notice of the date when the purification would end and the offering would be made for each of them. So, even though he's running around telling people that you no longer have to act like a Jew, in order to try to keep him safe, they're telling him to present himself to the temple as if he's going to purify himself according to the laws of Moses with these men, so that they can try to trick the people in the temple and the Sanhedrin that he's not been doing exactly what he has actually been doing. So I wonder, before I continue on here, how you believe at home that it's even going to turn out if you don't know this story. Paul arrested is what the next parable is called. Okay, verse 27. When the 7 days were nearly over, so they let him go through with the ruse for a while, some Jews from the province of Asia saw Paul at the temple. They stirred up the whole crowd and seized him, shouting, "Men of Israel, help us! This is the man who teaches all men everywhere against our people and our law and this place." They are willing to testify to his blasphemy, which has been public, making it kind of dumb that they were ever trying to hide it. And besides, he has brought Greeks into the temple area and defiled this holy place. They had previously seen Trophimus, the Ephesian, in the city with Paul and assumed Paul had brought him into the temple area, which was actually not true. But it doesn't matter. Verse 30. The whole city was aroused. The whole city was aroused. And the people came running from all directions. So it's quite a mess, right? Quite the public spectacle being made. Seizing Paul, they dragged him from the temple, and immediately the gates were shut. Now, this is a very important statement, because this is a statement to every person who is a Sanhedrin, because this man was important in their realm. That once you go down this path and you do these things, we are not going to give you the opportunity to purify yourself and put you back in our temple and put you back in our world. When you choose Jesus, you choose him at the exclusion of the old way, because we are not willing to let you back in. They don't have forgiveness at the heart of them, right? So it's not at the heart of that particular type of teaching when it comes from this. For them, this is blasphemy, and there's no coming back, because the tenant is not forgiveness. Jesus tells us to forgive an unlimited number of times. That's not true of every old ancient religious rite. While they were trying to kill him, news reached the commander of the Roman troops that the whole city of Jerusalem was in uproar. Because, of course, you can't have that. You can't have that disorder. The Roman commander will get in trouble, like Pilate gets in trouble with Rome when Jerusalem is in rebellion, or any of the towns in Judea. So they're not incentivized to leave it alone, is what I'm saying. He at once took some officers and soldiers and ran down to the crowd. When the rioters saw the commander and his soldiers, they stopped beating Paul. because maybe they weren't really supposed to be doing that in the first place. The commander came up and arrested him. I don't know why they're beating you, but you must have done something wrong, and ordered him to be bound with 2 chains. Then he asked, and none of this trickery stuff, then he asked who he was and what he had done. So he didn't even know who this person is. It doesn't matter. They're beating you. You must have done something wrong. Preconceived notions. Right? And then put him in chains. Some in the crowd shouted one thing, some another, and since the commander could not get the truth because of the uproar, there was too much noise. The truth comes in the quiet moments, not in the rushing about. That's why we must take time to heal, so we can integrate the changes into our life. He ordered that Paul be taken into the barracks, away from the crowd, so they might be able to ask questions. When Paul reached the steps, the violence of the mob was so great, he had to be carried by the soldiers. The crowd that followed kept shouting, "Away with him," actually interfering in the "away with him" in their yelling. You'll note, okay? Next thing is called Paul speaks to the crowd. Oh, I'm sorry, this doesn't actually take us to the end. That's next, that's tomorrow's parables we start. That's 37 is Paul speaks to the crowd. So away with him. Sometimes we get in our own way from what we want. And this path, this narrow footpath, does not allow you to not make amends for the mistake that you've made. You have to at least try. Even if you can't make it to that person because maybe it's not possible, you find another way to give back to the world in that way that makes up for what you did. You're supposed to leave the world better than you found it. This guy essentially had to be airlifted out by God using the Gentiles as protection from his own people, because he got himself into this situation by the way he treated Christians to start off with, and then going back to Jerusalem when he was told not to. Now we know from the future books that he writes lots of letters during this time, because just because you're being punished, don't think God won't still find a way to make you give light to the world. If you are intent on giving light to the world, he will find a way while you're in your penance, while you're in your suffering, while you're in your pain. If you reach for him, he will find a way still to shine the holy light through you. So don't think this because you come to be in a place of a disciple of the Lord, it means you're never going to be punished for what you did wrong. No, you're supposed to want to do your penance so that you are taking your correction, because you're supposed to be looking to be teachable, knowing that you're flawed, and therefore knowing that you need to go seek in order to find, so that you can be the better person. If you're unwilling to make the changes in your 3-day life, your 3D life, I don't know what's occurring in 3 days for any of us, but something big might be coming. Oh, that's the new moon. Actually, I do know what's coming in 3 days. That's the new moon in Cancer. If you are unwilling to make the changes in your 3D life, then, expect that you're just going to have to do your penance until you make the changes. But you're meant to be happy about it. Finding the grace and the light you can still shine as you go through the suffering. Kind of sort of being a part of the disciple. I know it doesn't sound too appealing. He never said it would be easy. He said it would be worth it. Because believe me, you do get things on the other side of that. After every penance, so after every lesson, is a big old blessing when you show him you choose him anyway.